The government has looked at enterprise zones, which are now the flavour of the day with the new coalition, with the new Conservative government in the UK, and said, oh, the UK's doing it, let's do it. When you look at the history of enterprise zones across the planet, they're used a little bit in southeast China, in areas like Guangzhou and others, to encourage industrial development. Not a great model for Sydney, I don't think. They've also been used in some of the rust bucket cities in northeast of the United States. And they've been used in a number of places in the UK. Almost invariably, they produce this. 3 years of short-term economic activity and building, which sucks out about, most of the economic activity in the jobs is sucked out from surrounding areas. About 80% of the economic activity in jobs is sucked out of surrounding areas. But there's a small upsurge of economic activity for 3 years. And then they fall into inevitable long-term decline because they don't have the infrastructure, they don't have the rational planning, they're not well located, and over time, when the tax concessions and the rates concessions and the planning concessions wear off, industry's interest in them wears off, and they become the slums of the future. That's almost invariably what's happened to enterprise zones across the globe. There's probably one exception, which is Canary Wharf in London. I don't know if anyone's been to Canary Wharf in London. It's not my cup of tea in terms of planning, but it's economically successful. And the reason it's economically successful, all the analysis says, is not because they got rid of the planning laws, but because they built infrastructure, public transport infrastructure, a rapid, regular light rail service connecting into Canary Wharf. They spent money on the riverfront and the public parks, and it's an attractive and useful place to work. That's what produces good outcomes. Public transport, investment in infrastructure. And it just happened to be that that was an enterprise zone in Canary Wharf. If you have enterprise zones without that, they are a disaster. But the O'Farrell government wants them to cover entire local government areas, or parts of local government areas around Sydney. And they've picked out a couple in their green paper already. They want to have that commercial district in Ryde, Macquarie Business Park. They want to have North Everleigh, the train yards at North Everleigh near Redfern, become an enterprise zone. They've got another site proposed in southwest Sydney, and they've got an unlimited wish list from the development industry to have enterprise zones around Sydney and around the state. It is extraordinarily frightening. There's a series of other ugly little things hidden in this green paper. But it's 84 pages of lovely, ugly, hidden things. And I'd urge you all to go and have a quick look at it. There's a green flyer on your seats which just sets out some of the highlights. And there's a link to my webpage, my office's webpage, but it will also give you a direct link to the green paper. And you can make a submission. Submissions from the general public are open until the 14th of September. Submissions from council are open to the 8th of October. To show this government's contempt of local government, they originally had all submissions closing on the 14th of September. Now, if any of you are engaged in local council election campaigns may know that there's a local council election on the 8th of September. And the thought that local councils could put a submission in to this fundamental reform on planning by the 14th of September is just extraordinary. Now, there's two answers to that. Either the government had no bloody idea that the local council elections were on the 8th of September, or they didn't care less. And I'd say it's more the latter than the former. And it was only after some pressure from the Greens and others that they extended the deadline for local councils to the 8th of October. But I've got to say, most local councillors, newly elected local councillors, all respect to any candidates that are here, are just going to be working out where the council chamber is and how to get their number on their business card by the 8th of October. And it'll be almost impossible for local councils to seriously engage in this green paper by the 8th of October. And the local council is probably, the local government sector is probably the key stakeholders in this green paper. Things can be different. We can have a different planning system. We can have a planning system that respects your rights to be heard, not just at a strategic and regional level and at a plan-making level, but also the quite legitimate rights we have to be heard about development that impacts upon us all the way through the system. We can have a planning system that actually starts with the principle that environmentally sustainable development should be the centrepiece of our planning system. And you may remember early in this talk I said that there were those two wise monkeys who went around the state and did a review, tall Mr. Moore and short Mr. Dwyer, and spoke to thousands of people. Do you know what their key recommendation was? That environmentally sustainable development should be the centrepiece of any planning law. And it should balance the economic, the social and the environment. And that should be what underpins all our planning decisions, both strategic and individual planning decisions. What do you think the government's Green Paper response to that was? They junked that key recommendation from the planning review. And they have the environment at number 8 of a checklist of matters which are the principles informing their planning system, number 8 after economic development and jobs. And no pretence of picking up the concept, which we all know, that there's no economy on a dead planet, and that unless you balance society, the economy and the environment, 20 years from now, we're going to have a city we don't want to live in. This state got rid of the pro-developer development laws of the Askin administration through concerted action in the 70s, the early, mid and late 70s. And in fact, it was over at Kelly's Bush over in Hunters Hill, where 40 years ago this year, a group of residents actually stood up to the developers who wanted to knock over their little patch of remnant bushland. And when they were looking around for allies, who they could find to support them in their campaign, which was basically lawless, because the laws said the developers could do whatever they liked with Kelly's Bush. But they weren't satisfied with that. And they stood up and they said no. And they were joined by a very unlikely alliance with a bloke called Jack Mundy and his organisation, which was the Builders Labourers Federation. Basically, you had a communist union leader joining together with a bunch of sort of extraordinarily upper middle class women from Hunters Hill, coming together with the same basic wish list and demand, which kind of unites us all if you think about it, which is we have a right to be heard about our development, about what goes on in our neighbourhood. We have a right to protect what's precious in our area. And we're not going to have the developers get in bed with the state government and run over that right. It didn't happen because a bunch of people asked politely of the government of the day. It happened because there were green bans and protests and opposition, because the community realised what was being done to them. I think as the community becomes aware about what this Green Paper is proposing to do on planning, we're going to have to get to that point again. It's become a very arrogant government in a very short period of time, the O'Farrell government. And this Green Paper, I've got to say, is an absolute betrayal of what they went to the voters on. And we are going to have to do two things. First of all, spread the word. Tell people about what's in store for their local community. Bend their ear. Direct them to places they can find some information on the Green Paper. We'll do that for a couple of months, but then after that, we're going to have to find allies and friends and groups we can stand with to stand up against this government, to make sure, A, it doesn't become law in the form it does. But if the government is so arrogant as to put in this kind of planning laws, we'll have to be manning the barricades for the next 4 to 8 years to pull it back and return the community to the centre of planning. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, David. Is anybody